Hmm, something's off. What could it be? Well, we are in Mercury retrograde, so here's a magic square for Mercury. Still not right, though. Mercury corresponds to Hod, which is the eighth emanation on the Tree of Life. Therefore, the number of Mercury is 8. But 8 what? Maybe I need to ring a bell 8 times. Nope, still off. Maybe I need 8 candles. Or maybe these 2 candles should be 8 inches apart. Now, musically speaking, the number 8 could also correspond to the value of an octave, so maybe I need to play octaves in this room to reset the energy. I just can't get it. Is there no one I can talk to about music, geometry, and harmonizing the inner structure of a temple? Operator, connect me to Christopher Penczak. Welcome to Music, Myth, and Magic. I'm Eric Arcadian, and today I'm speaking to Christopher Penczak. Christopher is a witch, a high priest, the author of more than 20 books, and one of the co-founders of the Temple of Witchcraft. Christopher, thank you so much for being on the show with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk.
Well, I'm excited to have you, and to just kind of kick things off here, could you give me a little background on how you personally got started with the craft?
I got into this, believe it or not, as a skeptic. The person who introduced me to witchcraft was an longtime family friend. She was actually my art teacher for many, many years. And it was back in the days where this was a lot less public. So she came from the mindset you didn't actually tell anybody under 18 that you're a witch. There was not a lot of pagan families and things like that, because it was the fear of corrupting a minor. And she ran businesses in town and things like that. And so once I graduated Catholic school, she started dropping little hints about that. And then finally, when she revealed she was a witch, I just thought she was nuts. Like, I just had never heard of that. I love the idea of witchcraft and magic and everything as a fantasy, but I didn't think that there were actual people doing it. And so she ended up really kind of introducing me to it. And I thought I was going to, rescue her from the cult, because I thought she joined, obviously, some type of crazy cult. And she shared with me a couple of books. She's like, I'll talk with you about this, but read this book first. And the first book she gave me was Stalking the Wild Pendulum, which is a book in quantum physics and kind of fringe science. And then I read that. I was like, all right, well, I have no idea what this has to do with witchcraft. And she's like, all right, we'll read this book next. And it was the Qabalah on the Hermetic principles. And again, I was like, this is kind of fascinating, but I feel like you're trying to distract me. What does this have to do with your crazy cult that you're a part of? And then she gave me Power of the Witch by Laurie Cabot, who was her teacher at the time, but I didn't know that. And then after I read those 3 books, we were able to have kind of a coherent conversation. And from that point forward, she started teaching me meditation and how to read tarot cards and psychic development. And I got to be a guest at her coven for a few times. And then after maybe a year of studying with her, she brought me to Laurie Cabot to study more formally in that tradition. And that is how I began. So I was really skeptical. I thought it was all crazy. Even when I got to Laurie Cabot, I went from going, well, I don't know if this is a nice idea and a nice philosophy, but could it be real? And then I saw her do things. I was like, all right, well, maybe you can do those things, but I can't learn how to do those things. And by the end of the training, I was like, oh, I can do those things too. So it was really mind-blowing and empowering in that way. But for anybody who studies with me now and they say they don't believe it or they don't think they can do these things, I have great empathy for them. And I just say, trust the process.
So what was that like kind of in the early years as a transition? You said you were brought up Christian. What was that transition like between the two belief systems?
Yeah, I probably transitioned out of the belief phase of it. So I was raised Roman Catholic. I am the child of 2 only children who were very kind of strong ethnic minorities. So my mother's side was Italian, my father's side was Polish and Lithuanian, and very much in tune with like the holidays and the saint festivals. And And they kind of moved us to the suburbs as their lives and families and jobs changed. But I was always kind of rooted in that with my family. And I was sent to Catholic school all my life. So by the time I was in high school, I was pretty clear coming out to myself, but not to others, that I was a gay man, and felt such a betrayal of the church to hear those teachings and to hear that somehow I was inherently other, and for a time sort of embraced, well, if you think I'm bad, then I'm going to embrace the idea of being bad. But it was really just kind of childhood rebellion type stuff. But really, by the time as I got into college, or just before college, is when my teacher revealed the witchcraft stuff, I was already hungry for something. So I was reading a little bit about yoga. But again, back in that day, there was no Hindu temples around. So if you wanted to know about, Hindu philosophy, it was like a yoga class at a gym. It wasn't really spiritual. Or I read a little bit about Tibetan stuff, but I wasn't really sure where to go with that. And then suddenly this, woman who I'd known all my life revealed that she knew this kind of secret system, and it was something I could practice and something I could experience directly. So I think at that point I was really ready for the change. I think before I met her, I kind of gave up the Catholicism and was an agnostic of some sort. And I think she kind of opened it up. But even then I resisted it. Like the second degree training in the Cabot tradition and what I teach myself exemplified that it's the priesthood. So the first degree, you're kind of a witch. The second degree, you're going into the priesthood. And I almost didn't go into it. And it was my mother who sent me to Catholic school all those years. She was studying with me, and I didn't realize till much later that she initially started studying with me. She was fine with me studying with the family friend, but when I started going down to Salem, Massachusetts and meeting people and kind of out of the sphere of influence of who she knew, she feared I was joining a cult. So she came to the classes to protect me and to make sure I wasn't learning anything bad. And through that process gave up Catholicism, because this was also when the church scandal was coming out and a lot of the sexual abuse stuff. So she was very fed up with the church, and she gave up being Catholic to be a witch with me. And then when it was time to go to deeper training, I was really turned off by the word priest. And she was the one who sat me down and said, yeah, but you get to be a priest for yourself. It's not what you think of as like a Catholic priest. Like you get to do ceremony. And she kind of made the pitch for herself that, here I am as a woman who gets to be a priestess, who gets to do ceremony in my kitchen. And I get to honor the animals in my backyard, and food is sacred, and the moon is sacred, and all these things. She's like, why wouldn't I want to be a priestess? So she said to me, why wouldn't you want to be a priest? Like, you get to do it all for yourself. And that's what convinced me and got me into it. So it wasn't as hard as you might think. I think the lead up into before I encountered witchcraft was the hard part of transitioning into not knowing what I was, or not knowing, what theology or beliefs or philosophies I had, struggling with that.
So a little after this time, you graduated from college with a bachelor's in music and voice, right? And also in music business. And you had a band, and your band talked a little bit about shamanism. And then you also wrote a book that was kind of, I think you had mentioned in another interview, a little bit of it was kind of based on what you had seen as you were going through the cities, like playing different shows. And that also mentions shamanism too. So I would love if you could extrapolate and tell me a little bit about that and the shamanism aspect of it.
Yeah. So I would say, I think in those interviews, the question was around shamanism. I would say it was around magic and spirits and pretty much everything. But when I was in college, I was in a band, and I used to joke, I do heavy metal at night and opera by day, because my degree was in classical music, and doing the music business side of it has sort of prepared me for all the publishing stuff that came later. But it was really, I was the lead singer. So the lead singer has a certain level of the aesthetics and the character of the band to it. So as I'm exploring all this kind of witchy, magical, spirit-based, shamanic type stuff, that's what I brought to the lyrics, and that's what I brought to a lot of the art, and that's what I brought to a lot of the aesthetic. We were sort of in a weird place. It was the time when like glam metal of the late 80s was dying off, and it was before like alternative Nirvana had just come out, but wasn't really popular when we were kind of in our heyday. And so it was really interesting to see, that kind of transition of it. So we were kind of darkly gothic with some things, and sort of glitzy with other things, but a lot of it was just trying to incorporate my own experiences. So between the time I was in college and then the band broke up spectacularly in a Spinal Tap kind of moment on stage. And then right after that, I ended up working for a studio in Boston, and turned into a record company called Fort Apache Records. They were a subsidiary of MCA Records for a while. And I no longer had the coven kind of contact as much as I did, and I was working crazy hours in Boston, and business would take me to LA or New York or things like that, even though I was sort of a minor person in the whole scheme of things. And I got to travel with some of the bands and things, and so the more I did, the more I started kind of seeing spirit outside of the forest, outside of the classical witches, go to the river, go to the lake, go to the beach side. I was seeing it in the different neighborhoods of the cities. And I was trying to like work my practice into my lunch breaks, when I was working in Boston and going to the parks, and, not just seeing it as the park as the oasis of nature, but what was the nature in the heart of the city? What was the nature, as you're walking the streets and interacting with people and spirits? So a lot of that kind of got fused both with my music in college and more of my magic when I was working for the record company. And all of that sort of ended up becoming my first book, City Magic, which I published with Weiser in the early, I think it was 2000 when it first came out. But a lot of it was written and researched in the 90s.
So at what point and why did you feel the calling to kind of leave the music industry behind and focus more on writing and teaching and spirituality?
Utter reluctance and desperation. It was not my choice in any way, shape, or form, although I agreed to it. So I guess it was my choice. The music business can be really toxic at times, and it's got a lot of crazy personalities. And I love my time that was there, and I really cherish the people that I met and the experiences I had. But as a spiritual teacher now, they weren't always the most healthy, as I look back on them, but that's where I was in my 20s. And so as things were starting to fall apart at the record company, and I didn't have a band project going at the time, and I was fairly new in my serious relationship with my partner, Steve, we're still together. We were, as it became a little bit more toxic in the office environment, I started getting these meditations and these visions where a goddess who I worked with, the Celtic goddess Macha, would come to me and say, you need to teach more. And at that time, Steve and I were practicing. I had my first coven in and out a little bit. We had a little group of seekers that were kind of around us that were witchy, magical people, just kind of getting together for book club and, getting together for some of the Sabbats and taking turns leading things. And I was doing a fair amount of leadership in that. And she kept on saying, you need to teach more. You need to do more for the community. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't want to do that. I want to be a musician. I want to, and I was trying to figure out as things were ending at the company, was I going to move to New York? Was I going to move to LA? Did Steve want to move? Did Steve not want to move? How is that going to fit our lives? And then in meditation, the goddess kind of came to me nose to nose and was like, you need to teach more. And I was so frustrated by not having my meditations go any further. I said, yes, whatever you want. And then the next day I lost my job. So everybody was getting, laid off. And I thought I had a couple more people ahead of me before I got laid off, but I got laid off next. And then when I went to meditate on like, well, what do I do and where should I move and what's my next step? In the meditation, she appeared immediately and just said, now you can teach more. And I sort of struggled finding a job, and I didn't. And I sort of struggled with unemployment. And I would have a number of office temp jobs. So I was pretty good in the administration side of things. So I would take these office temp jobs, and they would always end before they were supposed to. Like it'd be a 3 or 5 day job. And not that they'd complain about me, but they'd fill the job or somebody to go get back into it. And the one that was like the pinnacle of it, I was going to be at a local office just doing, receptionist type stuff. And the place burned down the night before I was supposed to go there. And nobody was hurt as far as I know. And someone made a joke that the business was failing and they were happy to get the insurance money for it anyway. But I never made it to that job. And I just thought, okay, all these weird things have happened, culminating with a fire. I should stop looking for office work and just focus on writing. And I put up flyers for meditation classes, and then later put up flyers for witchcraft classes, and sort of made the deal with the goddess. I will do what you want as long as I have the resources that I need. And from that moment on, I've never really missed a bill. I've never not had the money I've needed. I've not always lived lavishly, but I've always had what I've needed based on doing this as my full-time vocation. So I've been doing, full-time witchcraft since probably 1998, way before the books and such. And she's kept her promise. So I've kept her promise and kind of keep doing that. But it wasn't something I know a lot of authors today have these master plans of these are my books and this is the organization I want to do and all that. It's always been very haphazard with me, just kind of one step after the other, following guidance, because I really just wanted to be a musician. But here we are.
Well, that certainly sounds like a lot of chaos, but That's a pretty good deal. I'll do what you
Yeah,
want if you take care of me and I can pay my bills, right?
yeah.
Um,
I'm very, very blessed, very fortunate. Yeah.
at what point did the Temple of Witchcraft come out of some of this?
Well, the system that would become the Temple of Witchcraft was pretty early on. So I was maybe teaching for a year. And then at that time, Laurie Cabot was going through some stuff. So when people would ask to learn more, I'd always send them to her because I didn't really consider myself a serious teacher in that way. I was doing little classes here and there. And so she was no longer teaching publicly for a couple of years and I kind of stepped out of the scene for a little while. And so people would be like, well, just teach us what you know. So that very first class became my Witchcraft 1, and it was based a lot on what Laurie Cabot did, the first 2 degrees. And then after that, people would be like, well, what's next? And I'd be like, okay, I can share with you what I'm doing. And I would kind of cobble together things from my practice and make it into a pattern. And through the whole process, I ended up having this five level, 5 class system. And so that probably started in 1998, the end of 1998. And then as we went from there, they would tell people and people would want me to repeat the class. And then they would tell people and they'd want me to repeat the class. So I've been teaching some form of the Temple of Witchcraft since then. As the books, so we went from little notes that were like, this to binders and binders of notes. And finally somebody said, you should put this into a book. And so my 3rd book was The Inner Temple of Witchcraft. And it was basically the level 1 manual. And it had from years, almost 10 years of teaching at that point, all the information and the stories and things that I could put into it. And that sold well. And I was very fortunate and very supported by my publisher at that time. I'd moved to Llewellyn. And they offered to put out CD meditations and pretty much gave me a free rein to do a whole book series. So it ended up, originally it was 5 books, and then we ended up making it 6 books because we divided the last book into 2 because it was just so massive. And then from there, I started traveling and teaching about it a little bit more, and people really identified with it. And one of the weird parts for me was I never really called it anything other than this is the Temple of Witchcraft series. And I had somebody who'd studied with me and gone through the whole series. It came back to me that they were going to other events and they were describing themselves as a Penzakian of the Cabot lineage. And I was like, I never use any of those words. Like, it's just witchcraft to me. But I realized a lot of people look for identity and they're looking for community. And I wasn't really looking for that other than witch. So as I started to do more publicly, I tried to create opportunities for community. And that eventually went from tradition to community to organization to manage the community. So around 2007, 2008, we started having conversations about what's the best way to organize this. And I spoke to some folks who had some legal understanding better than I did. And we put together a proposal of a nonprofit. I felt like a nonprofit would be the best way to kind of hold community resources and have something that's not wholly dependent upon me or totally my business. My business could be separate from it. And then we finally ended up incorporating and getting approved in 2009 and have been a nonprofit. Technically, we're a church. We're a 501c3. So since 2009 and 2011, we ended up getting property and have been pretty much doing our stuff since then.
That's really cool. It's interesting how it kind of developed, and it was almost like people started naming it for you, the thing that you had put together. What would you say sets the Temple of Witchcraft apart from other traditions, if anything?
Yeah, actually, quite a few things would makes this kind of weird. So sometimes people come with expectations and they're shocked that we don't do things the way other people do things. So we're not coven based. We train more academically through classes. So people can be solitary practitioners. They can gather in their own groups, but we don't do things in a coven based style. Our initiatory system is actually based on 5 degrees, not 3, and they sort of follow an elemental model. We're not particularly focused exclusively on fertility and gender mysteries. That's a part of it. Sometimes people are surprised to hear that's a part of it. It's a part of it, but it's not the whole thing. We sort of look at the 5 levels. The way I describe it is the first level is the oracular mysteries and psychic stuff. The second level is fertility mysteries and celebration of the year and that type of work that most people think of as Wicca. The third year is the ecstatic mysteries, and that's more what people think of as witchcraft and the intersection with shamanism. The fourth year is the Gnostic mysteries and kind of getting mystical gnosis, and it really intersects with a lot of what we think of as ceremonial magic, Hermetic Qabalah. And then the 5th year is really about our high priestess, high priest, high priestess kind of training, both personal mysteries and the descent of the goddess, and also kind of rounding out your education to work in service with other people. So even though it's 5 levels, it takes about 7 years if you go straight on through, and not everybody goes straight on through. And we do it as a school, we do it as a class, so we can offer it online because we feel like the formula for initiation is your connection to the center. It's not necessarily based on a teacher blessing and bestowing upon you, although we do blessings. A big part of our theology, too, is based on one of my books called The 3 Rays of Witchcraft. So the key words of the 3 rays are will, love, and wisdom. So rather than focusing a lot on polarity and male and female and light and dark and sun and moon, although those are parts of our practices, we really focus on 3s. So a lot of our work is around the 3 souls. A lot of our work is around the 3 worlds. A lot of our work is around the 3 rays and how we kind of interweave those together. So a lot of the weird things people are like, oh, that doesn't really fit Wicca. That probably comes from our 3 rays model.
That's really cool. How does someone join?
We have a multitude of ways you can be active and be a part of it. You can just take an event and come to an event. If you come to 3 or more events, you're considered a member if you wish to claim membership. And if you're in person, and now we've been doing kind of meditative online Sabbats because we realized after the pandemic, we've got a pretty diverse global community that we don't have local connections to. And so either in the meditative Sabbat or in an in-person ceremony, you can get consecrated as a member. And all you have to do is come to 3 events. Doesn't have to be 3 rituals, can be 3 classes, whatever it may be. For those who want to be initiates, it's going through the mystery school. So if you finish the 1st degree of the mystery school in person or online, you're a 1st degree initiate. If you graduate all 5 levels, you're a ministerial member. And then we've got ways you can be ordained legally and enter into leadership. And you don't have to be ordained to be part of leadership, but there's certain roles like if you're not a graduate of the school, you can't be on the board of directors and things like that. But you can take roles in the different ministries. We actually have the whole temple divided into 12 sections. So part of my reason behind it was not everybody wants to run a coven, and probably not everybody should run a coven. It's a particular skill set that you need to both have and be called towards. So we have lots of people in the community that might be really great in educating about environmentalism, or want to do social activist work, or want to focus very specifically on women's mysteries or men's mysteries or healing or leadership and warriorship and things like that. So we divide it to the 12 zodiac signs. So once you become involved in some way, even if you're not an initiate, there's lots of places where you can intersect and learn about the specific things you're interested in.
So I did notice that division within the zodiac, and I thought that was really interesting about how all of those roles are structured and laid out. And also, so I have not read all of your books. I haven't done the whole series. I've jumped around a little bit, which probably isn't the recommended path for most people, to just skip around. But I've noticed that in some of your books, you have things laid out with a zodiacal map and structure. Mm-hmm. And what was the inspiration for looking at things that way?
I think for when we want to do initiatory teachings, what I've noticed in a lot of systems and a lot of teachers, it's very easy to bake into any system you create your own blind spots. You know, we all have the things that we like and we all have the things that we don't like. And I think if you've been teaching a number of years, you start to realize, well, just because I'm drawn to something, that might not be the thing that serves everybody. So I always like to look at complete patterns. And so the zodiac is a really complete, really diverse pattern. So in our high priesthood training, the year program is going through the year every month, every zodiac sign, and each one has a different theme. And I'll be honest, some of them are not my favorite. But I was really trying to create something that could speak to a diverse community. You know, just because I'm not interested in spiritual warriorship specifically doesn't mean that that's not a valid and important part of community and some people's paths. So I wanted to create space and training and opportunity for those who are really called to that. And then it's easy to kind of overemphasize what you're interested in. I'm very interested in healing. We could have done a whole year on healing. And we have classes like that, but I think when you're doing the broad-based education, you don't want to force everyone to be a healer because not everybody is meant to be a healer. So it's trying to find kind of those patterns. So I like how it goes through the elements through different cycles, goes through the triplicities and cycles. And so it just kind of gives you a broad spectrum of things, you know. So whenever we look at a pattern of things, I want the most complete pattern, even if it's not always my cup of tea.
Yeah, I found that fascinating. In the Living Temple of Witchcraft Volume 2, you kind of explain that map of going through the different months, and you have the archetypes laid out for different types of gods and goddesses to choose. And to be honest, I don't know what I was expecting for all the different roles and archetypes, but it was not necessarily what I was expecting for types of deities that I might want to work with regularly. And I was thinking like, I don't know who I would pick as my trickster god or goddess. So what kind of advice would you recommend for someone who is seeking to fill those roles and map those out? How do you find the right deity?
Well, I think sometimes it's an intellectual choice based on what you're drawn to or what you know. But I think my best advice is to work with who shows up. So another thing that sort of makes us a weird tradition is we're very technique based. We're not very culturally based. We're an occult tradition. So we're not Celtic, we're not Greek, we're not Egyptian, although you could work with any of those in what we do. But we work by function, like we work by trickster or warrior or healer or what it might be. And the best advice I got from a very good friend of mine about his own personal practice, my friend Chris Giroux, he would talk about how you just work with who shows up, which can be scary. So if you go in with the intention and you invoke the energies, for us, tricksters, Gemini. So you work with Gemini and you work with those energies and you see who shows up. And it might be somebody who's such a trickster, you would never think of them as a trickster, you know? So it might be a mercurial figure, it might not be. So work with who shows up. And sometimes who shows up will lead you to who might be the long-term relationship. And sometimes who shows up is the long-term relationship. As we've evolved as a tradition, we've sort of pioneered within the current of the tradition. We've got different spirits that are very specific to the Temple of Witchcraft. So if you're not involved in the Temple of Witchcraft, like the thing I love about what we've created is if you just want to use the books, you're welcome to use the books. Like you said, you can skip around with them if there's something specific you're looking for. If you wanted to go through the whole training, you have all the books right there. If you don't want feedback, if you don't want recognition, totally cool. Like that's my original vision, was just to put the books out and sort of be done. I never really had the desire to kind of create community or a formal school in this way. But since then, we've come through in group meditations 12 spirits that all relate to the 12 zodiac signs. And we see those spirits as the patrons of our ministries. So like in the Temple of Witchcraft, we have a trickster spirit named Zazaz. And Zazaz is the spirit of our Gemini ministry. So if you're an initiate studying with us and you're like, I don't know what trickster spirit I'm going to pick, I'd say, well, here's the invocation to Zazaz. Here's the imagery of Zazaz. See if Zazaz shows up for you as a member of the community. And that might be a good place to start. And maybe that trickster will lead you to somebody in your personal pantheon, or maybe not. But in the end, we're always looking for function. So sometimes different gods show up because they want to try something different too, or they have a different function in your life. You know, a goddess might be a mother goddess to one person, but a warrior goddess to another. And so just like we have different roles, I think the gods can have different roles too.
I think that is great advice to find deity. And I also think it's a little terrifying sometimes to just kind of like sit down and be open to whoever shows up and like, all right, we're going to go with that. I'm going to work with you for a little bit and
Yeah.
see why you're coming into my life. Cause that can be a little scary, but a worthwhile experience. And
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons that I found that approach so interesting was because admittedly astrology is not one of my strong suits. Like I'm pretty bad at it, and anytime I read something related to it, I always find it fascinating because I learned something. It's like, oh, I didn't
Right.
know that. So I was curious on that note, and since you use so many systems based on astrology, do you have some tips for doing astrology magic or incorporating astrology into basic rituals that would kind of help build up that practice and that knowledge practically?
Yeah. I would say, and how I teach it is to start small. And depending on what your level of astrology understanding is, start incorporating in little ways. And then when you notice that they've been helpful, start looking for more. So, like in our ritual magic and basic spell casting, we learn about the phases of the moon. So, if that's something you don't pay attention to, start there. If that's really good for you, then look at the moon sign. And then as you start to learn the moon signs, and I'm a big believer in students journaling and practitioners journaling. So take notice when you journal of what the moon sign is, and then you might start to feel a pattern, and you become more magically sensitive to it. So like sometimes you can feel when the moon is void of course. Like I know when I have an off day, I'm feeling the moon is void of course. But I don't know. I'm not always sure that that's what it is. And I'll look on my app, or I'll look on my calendar, be like, oh yeah, the moon's void of course. Part of our practices is to work with each of the days of the week and the planetary days of the week, and carry the stone for that planet on that day and see how that feels for you. And then when you use that stone in magic, you'll get that, or take a tea that's the plant that's ruled by that day, and then you'll start to kind of incorporate that. We also teach people in looking at the planetary hours. So do some spells with the planetary hours, and then do some spells without the planetary hours, which was more effective for you. As we go deeper into it, we do meditations on each of the planetary gods, and we go to their temples on the astral, and we try to build relationship with them. And that can be, whether you know anything about astrology at all, you can say, well, I want to get in touch with my fire and my warriorship. I'm going to go visit Mars. Or I want to get in touch with my sensuality and my sexuality. I'm going to go visit Venus, and have a relationship with them. And then you can start seeing how you might want to incorporate their correspondences or timing about it. Not typical to what most people would think. You don't have to be, you can be a high priest in the temple and not be an astrologer. I'd say the vast majority of us don't, look at charts fully. When you're going through the final training of our seminary, like because we're doing all the zodiac stuff, I say it's good to get your chart read by somebody. It's good to know where this sign is in your personal house, but a lot of people do and a lot of people don't. So it's not a requirement, but I think kind of looking at them as patterns and powers and things you can have relationships with can be super helpful. And then just following the patterns in your life. Like if you don't today, it's so much easier, have an astrology app and then just look at the aspects for your day. And even if it doesn't tell you what it means, or follow an astrologer you like, and if they post every day, you get a sense of what's going on each day, and did that feel right? Did their descriptions fit your daily life? And if not, look for a different astrologer, because it's the art of interpretation. Not everybody's going to be right for you. But I find those are really helpful ways to start incorporating things. But start small, and then as you get a little bit confident, kind of move to bigger things.
That was a interesting thing you just said. Try to look at them as powers and patterns. And as you were saying that, I kind of was thinking about the difference between viewing deity more as a pattern or a current of energy versus a personal relationship individual that you can talk to. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think in all mysteries there's great paradox, so I think it's both. I have deeply personal relationships with the spirits and deities and divinities and ancestors and angels. Yet I also know my conception of them, if they're truly divine, is my limited conception of them, and it's not really who they are. I think if you take from like African traditional religions, the image of divinity being like a current of river, and it breaks apart and certain streams cross. And so with that metaphor, it gets into, well, where am I on that river? I might be looking at a really ancient view of a deity. I might be looking at a very current view of the deity. I might be looking where two deities cross. A lot of my, personal practices as a hermetic Kabbalist witch, who uses a lot of astrology, is very syncretic. So there's certain places where deities, Isis, Aphrodite kind of come together. Isis is separate from Aphrodite, except when she wasn't. So like how do you kind of grok that? And I think it's important in realizing there's paradox. I think divinities are mysteries, and I think there's pattern and function to them. How we approach it in our community is by function. So if you want to work with a specific thing, who will agree to work with that? So the agreement indicates they're personal, and they have agency and they can say no. You might be really set, like with the trickster example before, like you might say, I really want Hermes to be my trickster deity. And Hermes might say, the hell with you. I'm not going to help you. And somebody else is going to come in. And that's the nature of personal relationship too. So I think it's a paradox. I think it's a mystery of both those things. And I think there's layers of divinity, and the ones that are closest to us can seem very human. And then as you peel back the layers, the further you get from the human level of experience, the more primordial they become. And the less easy they are to relate to on a personal level. And they don't care about whether you have a job or anything. They're there to interact with your consciousness. But on a personal level, there's deities that are very helpful for making sure I can pay my rent, like Mako making sure I get settled to do her work, but I also had to do her work of it. So, there's a trade-off of it, but it's paradox, it's mystery.
I think that's the best magical answer you could possibly give. Is it this or is it that? Yeah, it's
Yes.
Both. Yeah, yes.
That's my answer.
So you have mentioned several times a lot of the different meditations that you do, and just a moment ago you mentioned the Qabalah, and I know you have some Qabalah Pathworkings out there, and could you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in using the tree of life as a way of organizing and understanding information. I think it's become so interwoven and kind of baked into the Western occult tradition. I know a lot of people like to ignore it, but my view on everything, I think witchcraft has an aspect of being a scavenger religion. I think wherever someone wants to share wisdom with me, I'm going to take it. And I think trying to ignore it sometimes is more of our own human side. Like if someone has good information, kind of grasp it. So I think it's an easy, interesting way of laying out the planets, laying out the elements, laying out consciousness itself. One of the things that really helps me with the tree of life is how each of the spheres on the tree, each of the saphira, has a virtue and a vice and a vision and an obligation. Like it's really a map of understanding where you are in your own spiritual journey. And once you know which point you're in, you okay, these are the 3 paths out, or these are the 5 paths out. And you can kind of make better decisions of what you want to work on. And literally right in there is the symbols of the cards and the astrology and the gems and the elements and the herbs that all go with it that you can kind of define your magic with. So the 4th degree of our working in the Temple of High Witchcraft is where all this intersects in the journey of the witch. And so there's the different journeys for each of the 10 spheres, and how to work with them, how to commune with their angels and their planetary deities and what have you.
Well, that's something that I want to look in more. Jump in topics just a little bit. Could you tell me about your experiences with Laurie Cabot?
So Laurie has been an amazing friend and mentor and teacher and taskmaster over the years. When I first started studying with her, we didn't have a really deep personal relationship, but we really, what I loved about the training compared to other trainings that might have been out there is that it was very clear. This is the class. This is what you signed up for. This is when it begins. This is what you'll learn. This is when it ends. This is what's required. So that's always sort of stuck with me in my own training, my own teaching, because I appreciated that model of it. But she's been just such an inspiration to know, here in New England in particular. I know it's interesting regionally. Not everyone knows all the witches regionally, but here in New England, not only would she speak about witchcraft in the fall and try to educate people as we approach Samhain, but she was always very active. She was always very available to the public. She's one of the first people to truly live her life as a witch 24/7 where she could be found. And there's so many of our ancestors in the modern era. We think back of our Alex and Maxine Sanders and Gerald Gardner and Doreen Valente and all that really exposed themselves to dangers that we sometimes forget, that we have such freedom to be open and practicing. And I can be living here at the Temple of Witchcraft and have, knock on wood, no particular problems, but she didn't always have that. So she's such a pioneer of our civil rights, and she's done so much with environmental and women's rights and speaking about those issues. I just have such admiration for her, and just to see she's still teaching. She's in her 90s and still teaching. I just find that remarkable. And she still will sometimes read for people, and she's still actively engaged amongst her initiates and community. So I get to see her every few months. I go down to Salem and visit, and we talk fairly frequently online. She likes to text. So it's been fun to kind of keep in touch with her in that way. And I'm just really appreciative and really grateful of all my time that I've gotten to spend with her.
It's nice that you still visit and you get to see
Yep.
her. It's wonderful. Um,
Oh.
what's it like to live at the Temple of Witchcraft?
Good overall. I love it. It's a little weird to be that public. And, before we had pandemic, we were probably a little bit more active. We're still kind of building up to that pace, but it's interesting and weird and wonderful to have so many events going on in the place that's also your residence. And sometimes you're running those events and sometimes you're not. In the last couple of years, the thing that I've been most excited about that's affected this space, I've been studying with some wonderful teachers from France, Dominique Suzani and Karen Crowley-Suzani of energetic geometry. And they've been coming out every 6 months and teaching us about building sacred space with sacred geometry, and specifically temple building. So they have a system of how you can align things that harmonize the energy of a house or harmonize the energy of a space. So we've been building stone circles in the forest and gardens with these proportions. And the house itself, the Temple of Witchcraft itself, is 3 buildings on about 5 acres of property. We have a barn, which we're hoping to turn into a community center, but it has to be brought up to code for us to have things for the public there. We have a little cottage that we have guest teachers stay at and people can do retreats at. And then we have a large Victorian house where the bottom floor is the upper floor is the residence of the 3 founders, so myself and my 2 partners, Adam and Steve. And then the bottom floor is the classroom space, the office space, the temple store. And eventually we'd like to move more of that into the community center once we have that. But we really wanted to create something that would outlast any one generation. So it's my hope to have the community center with our fundraising built and the whole mortgage of this place paid off in my lifetime. And that way that the next generation won't have to struggle with those resources. But we also want to have all the back. We have a temple to the 9 mothers in the back. We have 2 stone circles. This spring, we're building a temple to Jupiter and a planetary temple. So it's just been very exciting. We have plans for a labyrinth, all fairly small. Like when I say stone circle, they're stones like this, but set in a very geometric pattern and very precisely aligned. And they just really change the energy of it. So living at the Temple of Witchcraft, there's a energy of living in a temple, of living in a sacred space. It's not just my space, it's our space. And to feel that spirits are active here and to feel that everyone who's a member of the community, their energy engages in this place. I think one of the difficulties with a lot of our traditions is being such land-based practices. Most of our traditions don't have places where the tradition is rooted in the land. When you're focused on covens where people are meeting in people's households, which I think is great, but there's no kind of homeland where the current can be rooted. And I think that's why sometimes the founders of traditions can kind of go off the beam sometimes, because the energy of everyone is sort of connected and coursing through them. So it was really important for us to anchor it in physical living land and our relationship with the land. And we hope, as we become successful and continue with this work, that our satellite communities will have land in their spaces too. And we hope to provide the structure and the legal support and the financial support for our communities in Mississippi and Texas and California and Missouri to be able to do similar things.
Okay, so the temple building is just too interesting not to ask you about in just a second. But first, because you're talking about kind of being in sacred space all the time as you live in the temple, I was just wondering, does that ever feel almost too ungrounded?
That's an interesting question. I would say we've done a lot of work to make it grounded yet spiritual. But interesting in speaking with my teachers. So there's ways of testing, like a lot of what my teachers do is harmonizing people's houses and places of work. And they'll go through this process. Think of in the ancient Greek temples, the columns. And their teaching is that the spacing and the length of the columns create different patterns of energy. And so part of the training is that we'll space them in different proportions and feel the energy by passing through just with sticks sometimes. And that'll be the test. And they're teaching us how to help other people. So you want to harmonize it to what the residents want, not what you want, And so it's interesting because every time it would be my turn to go or Steve or Adam's turn to go and experience this, we'd always want the frequencies, the rhythms that were associated with temples, not with homes. And the teacher, Dominique, was just like, based on the types of things that happen in this space. And it's not a traditional household. We don't have kids. It's not that type of family setup. Those frequencies, those energies suit what we do. But if someone in a quote normal family, with kids and kind of day job and living between the worlds in that way, were living in this space, it probably would be too much. Not to say better or worse, but just not the right vibe for them. So it's figuring out what the right vibe is. So we often pick things that are associated with the crown chakra or the higher planets or, a higher type of energy. But I think because we all have a daily practice and we all do a lot of ceremony and we all make a lot of our offerings to keep in touch with things, we seem pretty grounded, I think. But it is a different energy. So I'm affected by the moon. When the sun and the solstices change, we're affected by that. So we definitely feel the rhythms, but we're hopefully flowing with them. At least that's my hope.
Well, that's really interesting. The room that I'm sitting in right now is a very multifunction room. I make music here. I record these videos here. We eat dinner here. Our coven circles here. It's basically like the thing where everything happens. And so there's a lot of mix of all these different energies. And how would someone like me go about learning more about the temple harmonics and building the temple that way?
Well, in this specific tradition, they have a couple books out. Probably the one, if you look at, I believe it's energeticgeometry.com, and their main book, which I think is called Energetic Geometry, kind of gives a lot of examples of the system and dissects sacred places and dissects homes to kind of show how it works. They have a second book called Earth Alchemy, which is a little bit harder to find, but still a smaller and a little bit more practical book. And both of those can kind of help kind of understand it. The big theory of this system that I'm learning is it's based on your latitude. So there's not something that's one size fits all, but each latitude has a different rhythm and relationship with the earth. So like part of my training is I'm doing consultations with other people. So depending on where they are, I have to redo all the calculations based on their latitude. And then that gives me different proportions to work with. So in their business, they do consultations, and a lot of their students, like myself, do consultations to kind of learn more about this. So it depends on where you're at and what the rhythm is and what you want to be happening there. Like some of the things we've learned that are really simple in the training is you can make little cardboard cutouts in the proportions of the elements, or you can make cardboard squares in the proportions of the planets, and simply putting them out will affect an energy. And then if you want that energy to change, you put them away, and he'll talk about how in certain temples, you might have a specifically proportioned planetary square, like the squares with the numbers in it that people make sigils on. But you would just hang the square. And then when you don't want it to be effective anymore, you cover it with silk. And that's an interesting way of changing the temple space. So like, this is my temple room, but this is also my office, but this is all my personal practice. So it's a little bit different than our public spaces, but I have different things I'll move around when I want to change the energy. And I'm in a roll top desk. So when I want to kind of get away from the computers, I put the roll top down and I'll put out some symbols or sigils that, kind of activate it as a ritual space. So those are ways that you can kind of manage a multi-purpose space.
That's actually really practical.
Yeah.
We have a Mercury square that we'll leave out in the room when it's Mercury retrograde and stuff like that. So that idea is definitely easily doable, and it's easy to latch onto and wrap my head around. I think you had mentioned to me that sound and geometry had played some sort of part in the structure of the temple. How does sound play into that?
Well, it's interesting in this system that they're teaching us, the elements and the proportions of the elements for your latitude also relate to certain notes. And so you'll actually take the corresponding measurement of the note to make the height of like poles in the temple that you'd stick in our Temple of the Nine Mothers that we have out in wood. The poles have been cut specifically to resonate at particular notes. Now, it's not necessarily the note of, modern tuning A equals 440 hertz type of thing, but it's all relative to the geometry of your latitude. So that's an interesting kind of poetic way of doing it. In general, in our practices and the work that we do with my background in music, we tend to have chanting. A lot of our work from the Hermetic Qabalah type of stuff, loving the barbarous words, and the idea of using barbarous words just really unlock something primal. In one of our initiation ceremonies, we use something called the Bagai rune, which comes from kind of formal Wicca, but it sounds like gibberish. Some people might think of it as it's been dissected, and some people claim it's kind of a dialect of Basque language. I don't know if that's quite true, but there's a musicality and a rhythm and a sound that when it's chanted that just raises a certain level of power. A lot of our practitioners are deeply involved in the runes, and a big part of the rune study is the chanting of the runes and the casting circle, hallowing by the three Erts. So there's a lot of ways that we use sound in the space of the ritual. I'm very big on the Tibetan singing bowls. One of my earliest teachers was all about that. So just even the sound of that and bells and such are a big part of a lot of the activating of temple, because I think sound, whether it be your voice, whether it be drumming, whether it be stamping your foot, awakens different things.
That is beautiful. And you have almost answered the signature question that I'm going to ask you at the end of the interview, but we're not there yet. I'm going to ask you about some other stuff first and then come back to this. So you had talked about kind of where you see the temple going within your lifetime. You want to see like the property paid off and stuff like that. Where do you see, what's your vision for the temple like 100 years from now? Where would you hope that it's going to be?
That's a great question. I think part of me tries to hold a position of being unattached, because my work is not the future generation's work, and I don't want them to feel I've made a proclamation and this is what you should do. We're not a proclaiming tradition. So if the future leaders feel like it needs to be taken in a different direction, I'd want everyone to have that freedom. I would say in less than 100 years, if I came into, and I would love to, and put out the intention of kind of crazy resources financially, I would love to see a witchcraft village that is not based on the persecution of witches, and a place where we can showcase and train crafts that are associated with witchcraft, like weaving and milling and blacksmithing and things like that. I would like to see us having places to have more of a witchcraft holistic medicine. I would like to see a place where we could have more kind of community center in the context of a birth and death hospice from pagan priestesses, and birthing chambers, and that from a priestess point of view. I would like to see more of the constructs of the types of temples that I'm talking about. Like the temples we're building here at the Temple of Witchcraft are wooden posts and small stones, because that's the resources we have right now, and you work with what you have. But I'd love to have the resources to do large stone circles, and to do cairns, and to do dolums and menhirs, and the geometry of cathedrals, or kind of Greek Egyptian style temples and things like that. Because I think we spend so much time doing pilgrimage to the ancient world, and then there's what are the things that our generation's building that people 100 years, 500 years from now are going to come and visit and see and encode our teachings. So much of what we do right now, and not that it's not important, but is online, is kind of the electronic medium, or it's just through the written word and through a book, which may or may not survive as the world changes. So I'd like to see that type of physical, tangible community, where things can be shared and living memory traditions can be passed on. I don't know when that will be or where that will be, and maybe a future generation of the temple will be like, oh, we don't want that. That's okay too. That's just kind of where my poetic imagination's going. And if someone were to hand me all the resources to have that happen today, that's what I would do.
I like that. I like the detached but hopeful approach that you have to that. And I'm going to circle back to the music and the sound in just a second. But before I do that, before we get to the signature question, I would like to know if somebody wants to learn more about you, and not just you, but if somebody wants to learn more about the Temple of Witchcraft and getting involved, where can they go?
The best place is probably our website, thetempleofwitchcraft.org. And I have a personal website that's just christopherpenczak.com. And that has all the events of what's going on, our reading materials, a lot of articles and information if you want to just know more and explore. Those are probably the best places. I'm on most of the social medias, but I'm not super active on social media. It's not really my thing. So I think the website and the mailing lists are probably the best way to go.
Okay. I will post links to your social handles and the temple website and some of your books in the video description. What do you think your most important book is? Your favorite?
I would say my most important in terms of unique contribution is the Three Rays of Witchcraft.
Okay.
But I would say my favorite right at the moment still is probably the Mighty Dead.
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'd say probably my favorite that I've written hasn't come out yet, but I have a book that should hopefully be coming out next year in 2 volumes called The Witch's Soul. And I'm very excited about that.
What can we expect from that one?
It'll be training on the 3-soul model and then kind of dissecting it into a multi-soul model. And the first volume is kind of all your parts. And then the second volume is crafting the soul in unique ways for the mystical witch.
Very cool.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
And if somebody wanted to find you, will you be at any festivals or any in-person events in the near future?
Yeah, I do a lot of in-person stuff over the course of the year. My full schedule's on my website, and anything I'm doing for the temple is on the temple's website. I would think I'd say my biggest public thing is I'm doing a retreat for the Omega Institute this summer in July on Ascension Magic. And that's probably my most big public thing. I'll also be down in Birmingham, Alabama, teaching at Books, Beans, and Candles. I do a lot of local things here in New England at various shops. I'm often at the Robin's Nest. And so then those are the main things I can think of. I'm trying to think if I'm doing another convention. I'd say the biggest next convention I'm doing, unless I'm forgetting something, will probably be Temple Fest for the Temple of Witchcraft that happens Labor Day weekend in Massachusetts.
Okay, perfect. So if anybody is looking for any more information on any of those things, they'll all be posted in the video description below. So all you have to do is just click. And now, Christopher, I'm going to get to the signature question. How do you use sound or music in your personal magical practice?
I chant a lot and I sing a lot. Having the degree in voice, that's usually my way of going. So I have found using Sanskrit mantra to be really powerful. Thomas Ashley Ferran's book on healing mantras was a huge influence on me, and we have a lot of students in common through the St. Louis area, which is kind of fun. And just those chanting of those barbarous words, this chanting of magic coming up, sometimes just asking spirit for a chant that doesn't mean anything other than to me, but those are sometimes the most powerful things that I use in my magic, and they shift the energy and make things happen. And then, as I mentioned before, like the Tibetan bells and bowls are very helpful for me as well, just to kind of set the space and move it. But I tend to be very lyrical and dramatic when I do rituals, so half the things I speak and half the things I probably sing.
That's great. Out of curiosity, do you notice any sort of similar feeling between doing magic and ritual and playing music or singing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say particularly for me, and not that magic is a performance, but a lot of the qualities and techniques that are put into a good performance, whether you have an audience or not, but having the music flow through you is the same quality as having the magic flow through you. I would say, honestly, as much as I had the background in music, I'm probably not as an adept musician as I am a magician, but it's many of the same ability to keep many things going at once and be aware of many things at once and still not be attached to any of them and let the inspiration flow through you. I think as I was a mediocre musician, as I do more magic professionally, I understand what the more professional and inspired musicians were going through when I saw them do something really amazing, because I feel like that's how I feel when I'm doing ceremony and magic, but I never quite got to that level of proficiency in my music.
It's a beautiful way to put that. I love it. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. Okay, well, we have just about hit our time, so I'm sure you have many other things to do today. And I will go ahead and end our session, but I'm just going to thank you one more time for taking the time to be here and speak to me today and teach me all these cool things. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me out. I had a great time chatting with you, and I am excited to come back anytime you want me. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Another big M3 thank you to Christopher Penczak for taking the time to be on the show with me today and for sharing all of this cool stuff. I know that personally, I have a lot to work on in terms of selecting deities for my own personal pantheon, and maybe one day I'll get all of this stuff aligned properly. If you haven't already checked out the Temple of Witchcraft or some of Christopher's books, go ahead and do that right now. The link will be in the video description below. Wait, what's that? Please remember to like and subscribe here on YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and drop a comment or something. If you did enjoy the video, I guess you can also leave a comment and tell me that too. You can also follow me on Facebook or Instagram at Eric Arcadian, but if you'd like to help support me making more content in the future, the best way to do that is to go check out my Patreon page. I have tons of content up there for patrons only, like an entire album. That link, along with many others, will also be in the video description below. Remember, there's always a way to make music. Until next time.